In a village, somewhere deep in the mountains, there lived a woman named Raina. Her only son had died, and Raina lived with her daughter-in-law and granddaughter in a small, cozy house at the edge of the village. It might have been great fun to live in a house with 3 generations of women, but Raina was treated as little more than a servant. She swept the floors, cared for the animals, and did all the cooking. Her daughter-in-law and granddaughter never said anything nice to her. It was always, "Fetch some milk, Raina. Iron my skirt, Raina. Feed the pig, Raina. Chop down those trees, Raina." And so on and so on. They both thought she was very old and useless, and never even called her grandmother. But still, Raina was cheerful and pleasant to everyone. She took good care of the plants in the garden and was gentle with all the animals who lived in the barn. Whenever she had to cut down a tree, she always planted 2 saplings. She was even kind to her daughter-in-law and her granddaughter, although perhaps they didn't deserve it. She smiled and sang as she did her work and told wonderful stories to anyone who would listen. People always had something nice to say to Raina, and all the children and the dogs of the village loved her. But people hid from her daughter-in-law and granddaughter, and the dogs growled at them. Raina's daughter-in-law didn't like it. She was tired of the people of village hiding from her and her daughter, and she blamed it all on Raina. She thought that if Raina went away and never returned, the people would eventually forget her and her stories. So one day, in February, as a snowstorm raged outside the cottage, she called Raina into the kitchen. "It will soon be your granddaughter's birthday, and she deserves a special present. I want you to go out into the forest and bring back a bouquet of violets for her." "But it's February," explained Raina. "Violets don't grow in February." "I'm sure there are some out there somewhere," answered her daughter-in-law. "Find them, and don't bother coming back until you do. Go! Right now!" Well, poor Raina had no choice, so she gathered her coat and headed out the door into the driving snow. Her daughter-in-law smiled and waved, for she was sure that she would never see Raina again. It was still snowing as Raina walked between the trees of the dark wood. Even if violets could grow under the snow, she thought, I'd never see them. After walking for a long, long time, she saw the faint glow of a fire deep within a faraway glade. That's unusual, she thought. I wonder who could have built a fire out there. By this time, her feet and hands were very cold, so she headed towards the fire. When arrived within the circle of firelight, she found a most unusual sight. Around the fire sat 12 men. The first 3 were young boys, with excitement and laughter in their eyes, and tender grass and tree blossoms in their hands. Next to them sat 3 able young men with new beards, carrying dry ears of wheat. Then came 3 in the prime of life, bearded, strong, and capable, each with a bunch of grapes. And finally were 3 old men with long beards, each wise and kind and holding a musical instrument. The eldest of all also held a long golden staff. When the men saw Raina, they said, "Greetings, grandmother. Please be seated." Soon she was holding her feet and hands out to the fire and telling the men that she had to find violets for her granddaughter or never return home. The men looked at each other, and after a long silence, the young boys asked, "But now, grandmother, how do you get on with the seasons of the year? How do you like spring?" Raina replied, "I like spring well, my lads. When the spring comes, the mountains grow green. The earth is filled with flowers. The fields are soft and ready to plant. And all the birds begin to sing. In the spring, I always feel as if I am a young girl again and anything is possible. She smiled at the thought, and the boys returned her smile. Then the young men with ears of wheat asked, "Well, what have you to say of summer?" Raina looked at them and replied, "Oh, the summer is glorious. The warmth of the sun ripens the crops and brings the fruit out on the trees. In the day we work together in the sunshine, and we sleep with our houses wide open on warm summer nights." She smiled. "And I love not having to wear shoes." The strong men who carried grapes asked, "How do you get on with autumn?" "Oh, good friends," Raina continued, "in those months we gather in the goodness of the land and celebrate our bounty with songs and dancing. Folks gather grapes and make them into wine, while others stock up our wood piles and prepare our houses for the winter. I make the most delightful apple wine. It tastes of the summer sun and crisp autumn nights." Then the old men asked, "Now, dear sister, how do you with winter?" Raina responded, "Those are the months that care for us greatly, and we love them. People would work for the whole year round so as to earn as much as they can, but the winter months come and require us to sit by the fire with family and friends. I love to tell stories, and the music of those winter evenings is truly glorious." The men around the fire smiled and nodded at each other, and Raina began to feel warm all over, even though the blizzard still raged outside the firelight. Raina was feeling warmer and more comfortable than she had ever felt when one of the young boys returned to the eldest who held the staff. "Please, Brother February," he said, "let me hold the staff. It would only be for a little while." Brother February passed the golden staff to Brother April, who tapped it on the ground at his feet. Immediately, it stopped snowing, and the nearby snow melted to reveal a patch of vivid purple violets. "Hurry," said the boy. "Pick as many as you can, for there isn't much time." "Thank you," said Raina as she stooped down to pick the violets. "I am so grateful for your kindness." As soon as she finished gathering the flowers, Brother April returned the staff to Brother February, and as Raina looked around, the men and the fire had vanished. Raina quickly returned home and presented her granddaughter with the violets. Her daughter-in-law thought she had rid herself of a useless old woman, and the very next morning she had another task for Raina. "Violets for your granddaughter are not enough. I would like some nice, ripe strawberries. Go into the forest and get me some," she ordered, "and don't bother coming back until you have them." Again, Raina went out into the cold and snow, and again she walked deep into the forest. She was sure she would not find the 12 men, but, much to her surprise, she soon saw the glow of their campfire ahead. "Dear sister, why have you returned?" "My daughter-in-law wants strawberries," answered Raina. With a sigh, Brother February passed the staff to Brother June. Brother June tapped the ground, and the snow melted to reveal a patch of red, ripe strawberries. Raina quickly picked as many as she could carry. "Thank you again," she said. "You are so very kind." Raina's daughter-in-law and granddaughter were again surprised when Raina returned home, this time with strawberries. It did not take them long to eat them all. With her mouth still full of strawberries, Raina's daughter-in-law ordered, "Since you are so good at finding things in the snow, go back out and get some nice juicy apples. Don't come back without them." Without even taking off her coat, Raina turned and left the warmth of the house, and for the third time went deep into the woods to the 12 brothers. Brother February passed the staff to Brother October, who tapped the ground. The swirling snow stopped to reveal a tree full of apples. Raina quickly picked as many as she could carry. "I wish I could do something for you in return for your great kindness," said Raina. "You do not need to do anything," replied Brother February. "Just keep kindness in your heart, no matter what happens." "Oh, I always will," replied Raina. Then the staff was returned to Brother February, and the fire, men, and warmth disappeared. Raina began the long walk back. Raina returned with the apples, and her daughter-in-law now demanded to know how Raina was able to get fresh fruit in winter. So Raina explained about the 12 brothers sitting around the fire and how kind they had been to her each time she asked for their help. "You should have brought more back," remarked Raina's daughter-in-law. "Those apples are a very valuable commodity at this time of year." "I only took as many as I could carry," said Raina. "Well, I certainly would have carried more," replied her daughter-in-law. "I will go out tomorrow and make the 12 brothers give me more than just a few apples. I will get enough to sell in the village." "If I go too," said Raina's granddaughter, "we can make twice as much money." So the next day, Raina's daughter-in-law and granddaughter dressed in their warmest clothes and walked out into the woods. After walking for what seemed like hours, and just as they were about to give up and come home, they saw a faint light in a far-off glade. "There they are!" shouted the daughter-in-law, and they both stumped off in the direction of the light. When they finally arrived, stumbling and out of breath, Brother February rose. "Greetings, mistresses. How is it that you have consented to visit us?" "I am poor," answered Raina's daughter-in-law, "and I have come to you for help. I need to gather apples to keep my family from starving." "It is well that you have come to us," offered the boys. "And how do you get on with the seasons?" "How indeed," she answered. "Each one is a sore trial. Just as we are getting used to the heat of summer, straight away autumn comes along and chills us so that this one gets a cough and that one catches a cold. And then winter comes in and freezes us, and the roads fill with snow, and we cannot go out. And as for this lame John of a February, well, I ask you," she flapped her arms, pointing at the snow falling in all directions, "is he not the worst of all?" The 12 brothers glanced at each other, but none said a word. Raina's granddaughter continued. "And then the wretched spring arrives. It doesn't want to be summer. All it wants to do is make the accursed winter last 3 more months. And then comes the summer, and it is mad to stifle us with sweat by the heat and boiling sun. And then autumn returns, and we're whipped around the crazy circle once again." They looked around at the 12 men. "What more can I say, lads?" offered the daughter-in-law. "Our life with the seasons, may curses befall them, is worse than a dog's life." Then Brother February rose, and frozen tears dropped from his eyes. "Go home, both of you," he said quietly. "Apples do not grow in the winter." "Stupid old man!" shouted the daughter-in-law. "I know you gave apples to Raina, and we are here for our share. Give them to us." Brother February slowly shook his head and raised his golden staff. The 12 men and their warm fire faded as the snow and wind reached out for the 2 women. Soon they stood alone in the growing blizzard. They screamed for the men to return and then fought to retrace their steps through the deepening snow. In time, their voices grew fainter, and soon they could no longer be heard at all. Raina waited in the little cozy house for her family to return from the wood. When they did not appear and the darkness was falling fast, she lit a lantern, put on her warmest clothes and good boots, and went out into the wood to bring them home. The blizzard had calmed, and the snow now covered the trees and ground, shining in the moonlight. Eventually, after hours of walking in the darkness and calling their names, Raina did find the two women. They were very cold and very weak, but Raina got them up, and together they walked back to the little house. Both of the women saw what a kind person Raina was and how selfish they had been. And as the winter moved to spring, both Raina's daughter-in-law and her granddaughter began slowly to share in the chores, to enjoy caring for the plants in the garden and listen to Raina's stories. And although they were sometimes still mean and even selfish, the little cozy house was at last becoming a happy place to live. Once the snow had melted, Raina and her granddaughter planted 12 seeds saved from the apples Raina had brought from the brothers. They grew so quickly that by midsummer they were strong trees, and as autumn's chill began to frost the air, the trees were heavy with sweet, round fruit. The three women invited all the neighbors to come to their garden and share in the bountiful harvest. On a fine fall day, with the sky blue and clear and the air tart and crisp, everyone in the village came to the cozy little house. They picked and ate, and they took care to leave some apples on the branches and on the ground so the birds would not go hungry. Everyone was surprised when the 12 strangers arrived. 3 were old men, 3 middle-aged and strong, 3 strapping young men, and 3 little more than boys. No one remembered seeing them before, but the 3 women greeted them with joy and made them welcome. When the apples were gathered and people came to the table, they found baskets of strawberries, platters of fresh bread, and plates of sweet butter, as well as dishes of roasted mushrooms and onions, fried potatoes, corn on the cob, and kegs of beer and frosty apple cider. They stayed a long time into the night, eating, drinking, and laughing together. Music was played, dances were danced, and many songs sung. "We must do this again next year," cried Raina's granddaughter. And they did.